Gerald Foss had spent 41 years writing things down in a composition notebook. He died the January before Owen Cathcart walked into the Perkins County equipment sale in Grant, Nebraska, and bid $410 on 12 rusted bridge beams the county had priced as scrap. Gerald never saw what Owen did with what he'd been taught. But when the Frenchman Creek rose in the spring of 2021 and cut the Lamar Road at the low spot by the old Danner place, and every farm along that draw went dark for 14 days, Owen Cathcart was the one Gerald Foss had prepared for it. He just wasn't alive to see it. Stories like this don't get told much anymore. If you grew up around people who worked with their hands and didn't say much about it, hit subscribe. We're going to keep telling them as long as you keep watching. Gerald Foss was not Owen Cathcart's grandfather. He was not a relative of any kind. He was the man who had farmed the adjacent 340 acres to the Cathcart place on the Lamar Road for 37 years before he retired to a house in Grant in 2014. And the connection between them was the kind of connection that forms in rural places without anyone deciding it should, through fence lines and shared equipment and the slow accumulation of years of neighboring. Owen had been 7 years old the first time Gerald let him ride along in the cab of a 1998 Case 89 tow during fall harvest. He had been 9 when Gerald showed him how to read a soil probe. He had been 12 when Gerald handed him a composition notebook and said, "Write down what you see," and told him nothing else about why. Gerald kept his own notebooks on a shelf in his shop. There were 16 of them when he retired, going back to 1978. They were not diaries in any personal sense. They were observation records, water table readings, first and last frost, equipment failures and their causes, veterinary events on his cow-calf operation, input costs by year, yield by field, and water. Gerald wrote about water the way some men write about weather, which is to say constantly and specifically and without drama. Because in the Frenchman Creek country of southwestern Nebraska, water is the thing that determines everything else, and it does not announce itself politely. Owen had read portions of those notebooks over the years, sitting in Gerald's shop on winter afternoons when there was nothing pressing, and Gerald felt like talking, which was not often, but was more often than people who didn't know him would have expected. Gerald talked about water the same way he wrote about it. He described the flood of 1983 on the Frenchman as if he were describing a piece of equipment that had malfunctioned. Here is what happened. Here is what it cost. Here is what you do differently next time. He described the 1993 flood the same way. He described the ice jam in 2011 that had backed water across the Lamar Road for 8 days and stranded 3 families without a word of complaint about it. Only the facts and the dollar figures and what he wished he had done before it happened. He wished he had a second way in. He said it more than once over the years. Not urgently, the way a person mentions a thing they have accepted they will not get around to. His place was laid out such that the Lamar Road was the only access. The other 3 sides of his property bounded by a neighbor's ground, a feedlot operation, and a section of Frenchman Creek Channel that flooded its banks in a wet year with something like regularity. There was no practical second access for Gerald. He accepted this. He wrote about it in the notebooks and accepted it and noted every time it cost him something, which over 37 years added up to a number he computed once and wrote at the bottom of a page in the 1993 notebook and underlined. $31,400 in lost days, spoiled inputs, emergency costs, and cattle that couldn't be moved when they needed moving. $31,400. That is what having one road in had cost Gerald Foss across 37 years of farming in Perkins County, Nebraska, and he underlined it and moved on, because that is the kind of man he was. He gave Owen Cathcart 2 of his notebooks when he retired. Not the whole shelf, just 2. He said he'd thought about which ones, and those were the right ones. Owen was 19 at the time, and had just started farming his family's place full-time after a year of agricultural coursework at McCook Community College, and he put the notebooks in his own shop on a shelf next to his grandfather's seed catalogs and his father's equipment manuals, and looked at them occasionally, the way you look at things you are not ready for yet. He got ready for them in the winter of 2019, when he was 24 and had been farming the Cathcart place on the Lamar Road for 5 years, and had noticed something about the seasonal creek that crossed the back of the property. It crossed in the northwest corner, about 400 yards off the road, running through a shallow draw before it joined the main Frenchman Channel. His father had bridged it in 1997 with 3 lengths of corrugated steel culvert and compacted fill. Functional work, carefully done, but 22 years old by then, and showing the arithmetic of that age in small ways that Owen had been cataloging in his own notebook since 2017. Settling at the south abutment. A crack in the fill along the uphill shoulder, the culverts themselves still clear and functional, but the structure around them developing the posture of something that had been quietly working on failing for longer than it looked. Owen measured the creek channel at normal flow, 19 feet between banks. He measured the fill section, 11 feet of height above the culvert invert. He looked at what a replacement would cost if he did it right. New culverts, new fill, proper abutments, a compaction crew. He got a number from a contractor in McCook that was $14,800, which was not money he had available in the way that would make it easy. He got out the 2 notebooks Gerald had given him and read them again. He read the underlined number at the bottom of the 1993 page. He thought about what Gerald had said about the ice jam in 2011. He thought about the Lamar Road and the low spot by the Danner place, which flooded with a frequency he had personally observed 4 times in 5 years, and the fact that his own access to the back 80, the 80 that held his best hay ground and his winter pasture, ran through that northwest corner crossing, and nowhere else. He started looking for structural steel. He found it in February of 2020 at the Perkins County surplus sale in Grant. The County Roads Department had pulled 12 W1045 wide flange beams off the old Frenchman Creek low-water crossing on County Road 14 the prior fall, replacing the crossing with a precast concrete bridge deck that the county engineer had been trying to budget for 11 years. The beams were 30 feet long and had been in service since 1959. The county listed them as surplus ferrous material, noted that the oxidation precluded load certification for public use structures, and set the opening bid at $25 for the lot. Advised scrap value was $190. Owen arrived at the sale alone, and a 2004 Dodge Ram 2500 with 214,000 miles on it, and working heat, and a hitch that needed rewelding, which he had been meaning to do. He had $680 in his farm account. He had a notebook in his coat pocket with the beam dimensions, a span calculation, and a sketch of the footing layout he had worked out over 3 evenings at his kitchen table, using a structural reference his McCook instructor had lent him, and a span table he had found in an engineering bulletin at the Perkins County Extension Office. He had not told anyone he was going to the sale or what he was going to bid. Not his father, not his mother, not the neighbor to the south, a man named Keith Prater, who was at the sale that morning looking at a used road grader in Lot 6, and who noticed Owen near the back of the crowd and nodded at him, and got a nod back, and did not think much of it. The auctioneer's name was Dave Moorhead. He had a way of reading surplus lot descriptions in a tone that suggested he personally found them faintly embarrassing, which is a fair tone to use for 12 rusted bridge beams on a February morning when the temperature is 14 degrees. He read the description. He opened at $25. A man from a scrap hauling operation in Ogallala said $25. Owen said $200. The scrap hauler looked at him. Owen looked at the beams. The scrap hauler said $250. Owen said $410. There was a pause of the kind that happens when a number settles into a room and doesn't match anything anyone was expecting. Dave Moorhead said $410. Do I hear $450? He said it twice. He said sold. $410. Keith Prater watched this happen from 15 feet away. He did not approach Owen afterward, because Owen had the look of a man who had just spent more than he was comfortable with and needed a moment. Keith had farmed long enough to recognize that look and respect it. Owen arranged the beam transport through a neighbor with a flatbed trailer, made 2 trips over 2 weekends, and stacked the beams on high ground at the edge of his shop yard. They sat there through the rest of February and through March while the ground firmed. He poured the footings himself in late April, mixing in a rented drum mixer because the ready-mix minimums were more than he needed. He set the beams in pairs on a borrowed telehandler, 3 pairs side by side for an 8-foot deck width, spanning 22 feet of channel with 4 feet of bank bearing on each side. He decked it with 2-inch oak planks from a sawmill in Waneta and fastened them with structural screws he ordered online. The whole job took 4 weekends and cost $2,060, including the beams, the concrete, the lumber, the hardware, and the equipment rental. His father came out and looked at it when it was finished. He walked across it and looked at the footings and looked at the beam bearing and did not say much. He asked where Owen had gotten the span design. Owen showed him the notebook with the calculations. His father looked at the calculations for longer than Owen expected him to. He said the safety factor looked conservative. Owen said he'd used 1.75 on the live load. His father said that was right. He said Gerald used to do that. Owen said he knew. The spring of 2021 was the wettest in Perkins County since 1995. The Frenchman Creek crested at 14.1 feet on the gauge at the Grant Bridge on April 9th. The low spot on the Lamar Road went under on April 7th, and the county closed it that afternoon and did not reopen it for 14 days. 11 farms used the Lamar Road as their primary access. 11 farms lost it on April 7th. One of those farms had a second way in, a 2-track that ran from an adjoining section line road along the north edge of the property, through the gate in the northwest corner, down into the draw, and across a creek that was running hard and dark and full under 12 W1045 beams that had been in Perkins County since 1959 and were not done working yet. Owen moved cattle on that crossing for 9 of the 14 days. A vet came in twice. His father brought parts for a hydraulic repair. A fuel truck made a delivery that would have been difficult to defer. The crossing deck was dry the whole time. The water came within 1.5 feet of the planks at the peak on April 10th, and then began to fall. And Owen stood on the bank in the early morning and watched it fall, and did not feel anything he would have described as triumph. He felt something quieter. The satisfaction of a thing that was supposed to work, working because it had been figured correctly. Keith Prater lost access to his winter pasture for 11 of the 14 days. He had 32 cow-calf pairs back there and could not check them the way he wanted to. He got through it without serious loss, but not without cost. 2 calves he could not get eyes on for 4 days, one of which had a navel infection he caught late and had to treat aggressively. He drove over to the Cathcart place after the road reopened and found Owen in the shop and asked him directly how he had been getting back to his pasture. Owen told him about the crossing. Keith asked who had designed it. Owen said he'd done it himself, off span tables and a reference his instructor had lent him, and some things he'd learned from Gerald Foss. Keith said Gerald had been a careful man. Owen said he had been. Keith asked what the crossing had cost. Owen told him. Keith stood there for a moment, doing the arithmetic of that against 11 days of lost access, and said that Owen had gotten himself a bargain. Owen said he thought so too. Gerald Foss's 2 notebooks are still on the shelf in Owen's shop, between the seed catalogs and the equipment manuals. Owen has his own notebooks now, 4 of them, going back to his first year of farming, written in the same flat declarative style Gerald used, because that is the style you learn when you learn it from someone who knew what it was for. The underlying number from the 1993 notebook, $31,400, is in there. Owen copied it into his own first notebook the winter he read it, on a blank page near the back, without comment. Just the number. And below it in his own handwriting, 1 word. Noted.